Hello, a very good morning to you. Well, we start today with some breaking news as GDP figures for November are just out. Now, this is the first assessment of the economy after Rishi Sunak's first full month in office. Well, monthly GDP, the standard measure of the size of the economy, fell by 0.6% in September 2022. Now, this decline was partly down to the additional bank holiday for the Queen's funeral, with many businesses closed. The British economy bounced back in October, growing by 0.5%, but this was widely considered to be a bit of a false dawn. And then breaking news this morning, with the Office of National Statistics confirming that the UK economy unexpectedly grew by 0.1% in November. So let's get more on these latest figures. We can bring in our correspondent, Mari Aurora, now. So, Mari, 0.1% growth in these latest figures. Was that unexpected?
Yes, Anna, that was massively unexpected. So far, we kind of had a general expectation was about 0.3%. We were expecting it to contract by 0.3%. So this is a really positive outlook for the UK economy. And to an extent, therefore, really to an extent, we could say Rishi Sunak has been vindicated. One of his 5 pledges that he outlined just last week was actually to grow the economy. So technically, he's done that. And now, obviously, depends on whether he can actually continue that throughout the year. But so far, so good. So I think that will be very much light relief for the Prime Minister today. Now, interestingly, we had those stats from previous months. So October, it grew by 0.5%, but we were aware that was seen, as you say, as a bit of a false dawn. But also in September, we had that 0.6 contraction as well. And as you say, we expected that to be partly down to the Queen's funeral and that extra bank holiday, therefore kind of throwing a curveball in there economically. But so far, I mean, economists will be, to an extent, quite surprised by this, and obviously pleasantly surprised by this. I think this is really, really good headlines for Number 10. At the moment, they are very, very concerned about their image, especially with strikes and other political difficulties. And now they can show that they have got a grip on the economy, and Rishi Sunak is the right man for the job.
Yeah, interesting stuff, Mari. So just to remind everybody, Office for National Statistics, with those latest figures saying the UK economy grew by 0.1% between October and November. Mari, thanks very much indeed. Now, a woman has died and another has been injured in a dog attack in Surrey, with 7 dogs being rounded up by police. So let's find out more about what happened. Sky's Shaman Freeman-Powell is at the scene now. Shaman, this sounds like an absolutely horrendous incident. What details do we have?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Well, as it stands, the road that you can see directly behind me, that's an access road that leads on to Gravelly Hill, and this has been cordoned off now since yesterday afternoon. That's when emergency services responded to calls that a dog had been attacking members of the public. Now, emergency services arrived, but despite the best efforts of paramedics, sadly, a woman in her 20s was pronounced dead here at the scene. Now, the details of the woman in her 20s is yet to be released to media, but the police have said that her next of kin have been informed and that support officers are supporting her family at this time. Now, a second woman was also taken to hospital for her condition as well, but police say that her injuries are not thought to be life-threatening. Now, the details surrounding exactly what happened still remain unclear, but we do know that yesterday that the police attended here with armed officers and the help from National Police Air Service, and they detained 7 dogs who currently remain in police custody. Now, the police have commented and are asking for members of the public not to speculate about what happened here yesterday afternoon. Now, in a statement, Chief Inspector Alan Sproston said, "Our thoughts are with the family of the woman who sadly died. The incident will be concerning to local community, and I would like to reassure them that we believe that all dogs have been accounted for and are in police custody." He continues by saying that our investigation is to establish the circumstances of the incidents and it remains ongoing, and we would ask the community not to speculate.
Shaman, thanks very much indeed. A man has been charged with the murder of 26-year-old Ellie Edwards, who was shot dead on Christmas Eve at a Merseyside pub. The beautician had been out celebrating with friends when she was shot. She was later pronounced dead in hospital. 22-year-old Connor Chapman has also been charged with 2 counts of attempted murder and will appear in court later today. The shooting also left 4 men injured. Lisa Marie Presley has died, aged 54. The singer and the only child of rock and roll legend Elvis had been taken to hospital after suffering possible cardiac arrest. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has the latest from Los Angeles.
Lisa Marie Presley was a very well-known figure in Hollywood, not just because she was the daughter and the only child of rock and roll legend Elvis. She also had marriages to Michael Jackson and Nicolas Cage. She too was the owner of her father's Graceland property in Memphis, Tennessee, which she's made into one of America's leading tourist attractions. The first hint that we got that something had gone terribly wrong with her health was when emergency services were called to her home in Calabasas, a suburb of Los Angeles, after she suffered a suspected cardiac arrest. Her mother, Priscilla, the pair were very close, then wrote on Instagram asking people for their prayers for her daughter. But it was just a few hours later that Priscilla Presley released a statement. I'll read that now. She said, "It's with a heavy heart that I must share the devastating news that my beautiful daughter, Lisa Marie, has left us. She was the most passionate, strong and loving woman I have ever known. We ask for privacy as we try to deal with this profound loss." The Presley family is no stranger to grief or premature death. Lisa Marie was just 9 years old when her father, Elvis, died of a heart attack at Graceland in 1977. And just a couple of years ago, Lisa Marie's son, Benjamin, died by suicide. And she's recently wrote an essay talking about the profound effect grief like that has on an individual. The Presley family once again in mourning for Lisa Marie Presley this time, who's died at the age of 54.
Well, there have been tributes coming in overnight for Lisa Marie. The singer Pink issued a statement on Instagram and said, "Oh, this one hurts my heart. Lisa Marie, you were one of a kind." Actor John Travolta said, "Lisa, baby girl, I'm so sorry. I'll miss you, but I know I'll see you again. My love and heart goes out to Riley, Priscilla, Harper and Finley." And Rita Wilson posted on behalf of herself and her husband, Tom Hanks, who starred in the recent Elvis biopic. She said, "Our hearts are broken with the sudden and shocking passing of Lisa Marie Presley tonight." Now, a donor who bankrolled Nigel Farage's Brexit party has made Boris Johnson the #1 most donated to MP this Parliament after donating a 7-figure sum. Well, the former Prime Minister received a single donation of £1 million from Brexiteer and crypto investor Christopher Harborne, a former Tory donor. And the donation makes Boris Johnson the MP who's received the most through donations, a total in excess of £1.2 million. Well, our political correspondent Rob Powell is here with me. A very good morning to you, Rob. Good to see you. So it's a lot of money, isn't it? Does it tell us anything about Boris Johnson's political future, do you think?
I think you can probably read into it that he's not planning on going anywhere. I think this is probably, to my mind anyway, the largest single political donation any MP has ever had. As you say, it came from Christopher Harborne. He's someone who is an investor in the tech industry, deals in cryptocurrency and things like that. He previously, as you say, has donated to the Brexit Party, to Nigel Farage, so clearly is a big Brexiteer there. Now, these donations are usually spent on things like office costs and staffing and campaigning. Former Prime Ministers already get an allowance to run things like administrative spend and office costs. So precisely what he's going to spend this on, I think, is probably a fair question. This came in the latest registers of interests that was published, where MPs have to declare things like this. There was also information in there about more speeches he was giving. We already know the former Prime Minister has earned hundreds of thousands of pounds from giving speeches across the world. He's also been living rent-free in a home owned by the JCB chairman as well. That's been declared on there. So as I say, I think, what can you read into this? Well, I don't think Boris Johnson is going to slip away into obscurity anytime soon. That's perhaps backed up by a story that we're running this morning as well. Friends of Boris Johnson, allies, have told Sky News that potentially if he was offered a safe seat to stand in the next election, then he might sort of call off the dogs, if you like, on Rishi Sunak or not challenge him in the near future, especially if there are disappointing results in the May leadership. Look, I think a lot of MPs, when you ask about the prospect of a Boris Johnson comeback, would sort of raise a quizzical eyebrow, if you like, because clearly he is a divisive figure within the party. This shows that there are still a kind of rump of MPs that believe he could come back, want him to come back. Many will be fiercely in the opposite camp. And the other thing about this story is that whilst I think allies will say this comes from a position of strength, that they are saying he may well be able to challenge Rishi Sunak for the top job, actually it sort of comes from a position of weakness because it's a tacit acknowledgement that he is sitting on quite a small majority in his West London seat and he may well lose it in the next election.
Yeah, interesting. And of course, Rishi Sunak, meanwhile, has set out these 5 pledges, hasn't he, for people to judge him on. 3 of them actually relate to the economy, one specifically about economic growth. And we have just had the latest growth figures out, which surprised economists. They had thought it would show a slight fall. It's actually shown a very slight rise. He'll be welcoming that.
Yeah, you imagine Number 10 will jump on that. I think in terms of his promises, we will have to wait over the longer term and get some of the quarterly data that will come out next month before we can really start to take a full picture of where the economy is going. And I think it will take longer into the new year to make a judgment on that as well. Also, when you read into the release from the Office for National Statistics into sort of the breakdown of what lies behind this 0.1% growth in November, it talks about how a large part of it came down from a 0.4% increase in output from consumer-facing services that was majorly driven by growth from food and beverage service activities in a month where the FIFA World Cup started. So clearly some of this is being driven by more people going to the pub to watch the football, more people going out and using pubs and restaurants and things like that. So how much it can be tied up, I guess, with Rishi Sunak's handling of the economy and political approach is debatable.
Yeah, interesting. And we are talking to an economist a little bit later, so they'll dig into the figures too. Rob, thanks very much indeed. Now, Ukraine has said its troops were holding out against pro-Moscow forces in the eastern salt mining town of Solidar. More than 500 civilians, including children, are said to be trapped there. Russia's Wagner Group, run by an ally of President Vladimir Putin, claimed to have taken Solidar. Meanwhile, Western countries have started to offer Kyiv advanced weaponry. Poland has confirmed plans to send more than a dozen tanks to Ukraine. Kyiv will be equipped with Leopard 2 and Challenger tanks. The move represents a significant step up in Western support. Yesterday, the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK, Vadim Prystaiko, was on the show and told us his country needed many more tanks from its NATO allies.
We need thousands, that's for sure, because Russians are putting thousands of tanks in front of our lines. We have many of ours, but we need something better than we can come up right now with the old Soviet style. Not that bad, but still outdated. So the Challengers, the Abrams, the Leopards, which are in abundance in Europe, this is the way to go.
When NATO countries start to give you military hardware on that level, does that ratchet up the situation?
I believe it's a bit too late to talk about the crossing some red lines. There's so many of them been already crossed, and the thickest one was Ukrainian border between Russia and Ukraine. So let's leave it. It's already too late. We have to do whatever we can to, to reduce the suffering on both sides and just finish up the war.
Well, our international correspondent Alex Rossi has this report from Solidar.
This is one of the fiercest fights in this war. Armoured vehicles careering back and forth to the front line along snowy roads to lay down fire. The sky over Solidar is clouded with smoke, and the ground shakes with the incessant thud of artillery. In hidden positions on the outskirts, Ukrainian drone operators gather intelligence as shells whistle overhead. The soldiers here deny that Russia has captured the town.
Хлопці стоять в Солидарі. Вони хочуть обійти по флангах. Да. Але хлопці тримають оборону. Ніхто не відходить, ніхто не відступає. Тому що це наша земля.
The drones are helping them target Russia's advancing infantry.
Група російських окупаційних військ пішла на штурм наших позицій.
He shows us new footage. The image is grainy, but you can make out a soldier dragging an injured comrade to safety. But nowhere is safe here, with both sides taking heavy casualties.
You can hear the sound of machine gun fire in the distance. We are literally at the entrance to Soledar. You can see the salt mine over there where there's smoke on the horizon. Now the villages here are mostly deserted. People have either left or are trying to escape. Some are staying. But one thing's clear is that the fighting remains incredibly intense.
This war is unrelentingly grim. The shell-shocked civilians stuck in the middle exist in constant danger. And there's not much hope as the front line moves closer.
Сами видите. Дом разрушен, все побито. Газа нет, воды нет, света нет.
At the hospital in Kramatorsk, some of the injured from the front arrive for emergency treatment. Many have serious injuries. They're often engaging with their enemy at distances of just 30 meters.
It's close combat. We have gunshots, we have grenade shrapnel wounds and so on. So this kind of wounds increased.
Russian forces have, though, taken much of the town. And if they do win here, it will be the first victory for Vladimir Putin's forces in months, after many military setbacks. But it has come at an enormous cost. Alex Rossi, Sky News, on the outskirts of Soledar.
Let's just bring you a quick response from the Chancellor to those latest growth figures that we brought you at the top of the hour, the figures that show that the economy grew by 0.1% in November. The Chancellor has responded in the last few moments, saying we have a clear plan to halve inflation this year. He says this is an insidious hidden tax which has led to hikes in interest rates and mortgage costs, holding back growth here and around the world. And Jeremy Hunt goes on to say, to support families through this tough patch, we will provide an average of £3,500 support for every household over this year and next. But the most important help we can give is to stick to the plan to halve inflation this year so that we can get the economy growing. So Jeremy Hunt there responding to those growth figures and saying they do have a plan, and that is to tackle inflation. And with that, they hope growth will come. Now, let me just let you know what's coming up on the show in the next few moments. I will be speaking to the former diplomat and NATO official as Vladimir Putin replaces his Ukraine war commander. Also ahead, I'll be speaking to the head of payments at the post office, which is urging people who use prepayment meters to claim the government's energy discount. And then, after 8, we'll assess this morning's GDP figures a bit further with the economist and former Bank of England official, Andrew Sentence. But first, some other news, and millions more people with a future risk of heart attack and stroke could be given the choice to take statins under new guidelines. Latest evidence from the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence on the safety profile of statins suggests that more people could benefit from the cholesterol-lowering and clot-busting drug. A suspect has been charged with murder for the assassination of Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Japanese prosecutors have formally charged Tetsuya Yamagami. It's believed he shot the former leader with a homemade gun during a campaign speech in July outside a train station in western Japan. A special counsel has been appointed to investigate the discovery of classified documents in US President Joe Biden's home and former Washington office. US Attorney General Merrick Garland announced that Robert Hur, the former Trump-appointed US Attorney for the District of Maryland, will lead that investigation. Now then, I'm joined now by the Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, Peter Kyle. Peter Kyle, very good morning to you. Lots to talk to you about this morning. But I wonder if we could kick off with your reaction to the latest growth figures that were announced at 7 o'clock this morning, showing that the economy grew by 0.1% in November, a sign that things are improving.
Well, a sign of basically effectively no growth actually isn't a sign of success for our economy. What we need to be doing is having a much more fundamental rethink about how our economy is being run, link it to the industrial action at the moment, link it to the failure in public services. When you have 7 million people waiting for treatment on the NHS, that is 7 million people who are unable to fully engage in the economy, in work, who will be taking time off sick. So it's not just about the fundamentals of direct economic policy that we need to look at. It is the running of our public services in our country, which is preventing us from fully exploring our potential as a country and individuals out there in the economy. These are the things we need to get right in order to get real growth into the economy going forward. And of course, Labour has its plan for the Green Prosperity Fund and also completely reforming business rates so that small businesses can get turbocharged. We want to do that from day one of a Labour government.
OK, and let's talk about public services then and the running of them and the NHS in particular, because The Guardian is reporting this morning that the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, is privately conceding that he'll have to increase the pay offer to NHS staff. Are you pleased to hear that?
What I'm pleased to hear is that finally, far too late, because all of this could have been done before industrial action actually impacted our public services so profoundly, that ministers are willing to engage open-heartedly in negotiations, which is what I hope this is signalling. I don't know that for a fact, but I hope this is signalling. Steve Barclay and other ministers need to get into the room and actually start having things on the table for negotiation. Now, you know, when I was being interviewed by you some time ago, I was being asked, is 19% acceptable? And then suddenly, you know, the nurses' offer is halved over a period of a couple of weeks. Of course, so everyone has things on the table that they go into negotiations with, except the government. So other factors, the unions seem to be moving, seem to be willing to actually engage in and make concessions. The question is the government? And there's nothing that the government is going to do or likely to do or could do in the coming weeks that it couldn't have done this time last year and averted all of this industrial action.
I'm not going to ask you again what kind of a pay rise you think that nurses will get, because I'm pretty sure you won't answer the question. But where should the money come from a pay rise for nurses? Should the Treasury make more money available, or should it come from existing budgets?
These are all things that government are going to have to do, and governments do all the time. You know, in the last 13 years of the Labour government, from 1997 to 2010, we had no widespread industrial action because we managed these factors within the government. Now, sometimes it will have to come from Treasury, other times it will have to come from within departmental budgets. But also, when you get the government departments running functionally, these things are managed and they're baked in years in advance. The negotiations that we were having in government with the trade unions in our public services, we're talking about pay quite some time in advance, you know, sometimes years in advance, so that these things were all baked in from the very start when the negotiations between departments and the Treasury were taking place. So when it's done functionally, it avoids the kind of situation we're having at the moment. Things have become so dysfunctional in this government that actually we're lurching from one situation to another day to day. So what we need to do is get back to competent management of our government, of our departments and our public services. Only then will we avoid this sort of lurching from side to side.
But we are where we are. Given that, should the money come from Treasury or should it come from existing budgets? Because the fear then is that could affect frontline services. What's your view?
Well, my view is I can't speak on behalf of every government department from a position of opposition. And I'm sure
what Labour would do in this position if you were to take power now.
Well, when we do take power, we'll have to take a good look at the finances. Don't forget, we've had 4 budgets in the last year, 4 chancellors in the last year. We don't know how many more we're going to have before the next election and how much more damage is done to our public services and our economy before we take office. Hopefully, we will take office so we can start taking those vital steps forward. But we will make these decisions at the time of taking office. Right now, the government has to make that decision. There are a lot of financial issues within the way our government government is running our public services. So ministers are going to have to do what they do. Not only they're going to have to negotiate with the unions about their workforce, they're going to have to step up and negotiate on behalf of their workforce and their departments and their public services with the Treasury. That's the way it always works.
OK, I want to move on to talk about Northern Ireland. You're there in Belfast at the moment, and Leo Varadkar, the Irish Prime Minister, he said he's hopeful that an agreement can be reached between the EU and the UK on the Northern Ireland Protocol. I know that Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has been holding meetings with the Irish Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. So how hopeful are you?
Actually, there are signs of hope, and we are not going to play politics with this. We're not going to have normal tribal politics on an issue so important to the future of Northern Ireland and the restoration of the devolved authority here and devolved government. We must get it up and running. So we will be an active partner with government and whoever else needs to be in order to get something across the line. So there are signs we hear of movement between the UK government and the EU, and that should be celebrated. Whether it is enough to actually assuage all of the challenges which the DUP have raised, well, we'll have to see, because there's very little detail coming out of these negotiations. Sometimes I understand that, but actually, when it comes to the individual party leaders here in Northern Ireland, I think they should have been a bit more in the room and a bit more informed on the progress of negotiations, and certainly the things that the government are aspiring to negotiate in these really difficult negotiations. But once again, there's been very little negotiation in the last year. In the run-up to elections last year in Northern Ireland, they paused negotiations with the EU. And then when all of the difficulties within the Tory party unfolded, the change of 3 prime ministers, all the negotiations stopped. So we've had over a year or almost a year now with no devolved authority here in Northern Ireland. This could have been solved with negotiations in a functional way, perhaps 18 months ago, and we could have avoided this situation in the first place.
I just want to ask you a quick question on Sky's new project in conjunction with Tortoise Media, Westminster Accounts, where we try to improve transparency for the public so they can see what kind of donations, gifts and payments and other benefits that MPs receive. We can take a look at your entry. Your donations show nothing out of the ordinary, but let's just show people anyway. Do you welcome this tool that offers transparency to the public? Do you think that it's a good step forward?
I really welcome any transparency in politics, particularly when it comes to funding. People do have to understand that what I'm keen to explain and express is that each individual MP executes their jobs in very, very different ways. And sometimes the way we're funded and the expenses we claim differ based on whether we have a family or not. They're based on the distance we have to travel to get to Parliament each week. So I'm very mindful when the decisions that I take as being an MP will be different from others. And I just hope that people will engage in conversations with your own local MPs about the way they do the job before you come to any conclusions. So, for example, when you look at the donations that I've made, I had to seek those donations, which is quite a lot of money, because I want to have a very big presence on the high street in Hove, and I have a shop on the high street, and parliamentary expenses only cover about 35 to 40% of the running of my operation. So I have to raise the money through donations to keep that doing. That's because I aspire to do the job in a certain way and be very, very accessible to constituents and residents and anybody else that wants to walk in and actually, raise issues with me and seek help from me as an MP and just get things onto my radar. So to do that, I have to raise money. So I'm really pleased that people can look at the donations in a very simple and straightforward way that I get. And then I'm always here to explain why I have to seek those donations and what I do with those donations once I have them.
OK, well, Peter Carr, we appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us there in Belfast. Thank you.
Thanks.
And just to let you know, that's the QR code on your screen now that you can use to use our search tool and discover how much money that your MP receives. It's all in the Westminster Accounts from Sky News and Tortoise Media. Time now to take a quick look at the morning's front pages. And The Guardian has an exclusive, as I was talking to Peter Kyle about there, reporting that the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has privately acknowledged the government will need to increase its pay offer to nurses, they say. The Mirror also leads with an exclusive. Their headline, Heroes Cancer Treatment, as a number of firefighters at Grenfell have since been diagnosed with cancer, in some cases terminal. The Daily Telegraph understands that government intends to ban gas boilers in the next 10 years in a push for net zero. And the Eye leads with research showing that 34 homeless children in England died over a 3-year period. A look there at some of the morning's front pages for you. Now, more than 50 flood warnings have been issued across the UK, mostly in the west and the southwest. Parts of Wales have suffered power cuts and blocked railway lines, and more bad weather is on the way. Well, heavy rain continues to fall, submerging roads and putting homes at risk. The Met Office has issued a yellow rain warning, with some southwestern areas already having had more than 80 millimetres of rainfall. Well, trees can play an important role in preventing flooding. A new study by Forest Research found that woodlands in Scotland can save up to £100 million in flooding damages by soaking up excess rainwater. Quantifying this sponge effect helps authorities better understand the true value of trees in reducing flooding. And UN scientists have confirmed that the past 8 years were the hottest 8 on record globally. So let's get more on this with our Sky meteorologist, Steph Goulter. So, Steph, quite a shocking fact that, isn't it? But perhaps not surprising, given all the warnings that our planet's heating up.
That's right. I mean, we already heard that for the UK, 2022 was the hottest on record. But now we're hearing that globally, it's around the 5th or 6th hottest on record. So we're still right up there. And the last 8 were the 8 hottest. So it's not like this is an anomaly. This is just a continuation. And actually, compared to recent years, we've all been very, very warm. It's not the hottest, though, because we generally have some natural variability in there as well. So what's happening in the oceans, or what's happening, maybe there's a volcanic eruption. One of the biggest influences we have is what's happening in the Pacific Oceans, whether you have La Nina, which is a cooling of the surface waters, or El Nino, which is a warming. So 2016, which was the hottest year globally on record, that was an El Nino year, not really a surprise. And then for La Nina, that's what we've got at the moment and have had for the last 2 years as well. So it could be that this coming year, because we're expecting La Nina to ease, it could be that this year's even hotter.
OK, Steph, fascinating. Thanks very much indeed for that. So let's take a look then at the weather now, shall we?
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weather stays unsettled over the weekend, but it turns colder with the risk of some ice, snow and strong winds. There's a mixed start to the day with cloud and showers along with some clear spells. Strong overnight winds will ease slowly, but it will be a bit of a brief respite.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, with parts of the world experiencing extreme weather conditions, let's take a look now at the impact of climate change on the planet. And just to show you here on our data dashboard, the right-hand side of the screen shows how the UK's power is currently being produced. Nearly 11% there from gas, for example, 66% from renewables. On the top left, you can see how much warmer the Earth is now than in 1880. That's around the time of the Industrial Revolution, when modern records keeping began. And at the bottom, the total amount of CO2 emissions there in millions of tonnes. Now, do stay with us. Coming up on Sky News Breakfast, I'll be speaking to a former diplomat and NATO official as Vladimir Putin replaces his Ukraine war commander while the battle for a key mining town rages on. In a military shake-up, Vladimir Putin has sacked top Ukraine commander Sergei Surovikin after just 3 months and instead replaced him with Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov. Well, joining me now is former diplomat and former NATO official Robert Paschal. Thanks very much indeed for joining us here this morning. First of all, I wondered if you could comment on what's going on the ground. Heavy fighting in Solidar, as we've been reporting this morning. Why is this town such a focus? Is it strategically important?
Good morning. Well, it has, of course, like everything that's happening on that particular part of the front, of importance, because taking a town leads to a certain initiative, if you like, on the front. But I don't think I would use the word strategic. It is, however, important from the point of view of Moscow, and particularly those who are, on the main, are leading this assault, which is the Wagner group rather than the armed forces, the military per se, because they want desperately to show some kind of success. Hence you see this, essentially scorched earth policy, and something which not just Ukrainians describe as, making some slow advances on essentially the corpses of the people that they're sent forward. I mean, this is really almost like a suicidal type of an attack. So no, I don't think it's strategic, but it is politically, as I said, important both for the Kremlin and for the people like Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner group, to show that you can score some success, because success has been severely, has been lacking for Moscow for many months.
Meanwhile, we've learned that Britain and Poland are confirming that they're planning to send more tanks to Ukraine. Britain is sending 12, Poland is sending a company thought to be about 14 then. How much difference could that make on the ground, given the fact that the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK told us on this programme that thousands were needed?
Well, let's be honest, every bit helps. But of course, particularly when we talk about the Leopards that are German-produced tanks that Poland, together with about, I think 10 other countries in Europe, possesses, if particular supply from one country is part of a bigger batch, and there is essentially more than 2,500 available of such tanks. Many of them could be, without undermining the security of the mainly NATO countries, could be sent to Ukraine. That, of course, would be of immense help. And one also has to look at it from, if you like, a political dynamics point of view, because one of the biggest problems right now is not so much the availability of those tanks, modern Western-made tanks, but you need a decision, first of all, of Germany, that it's okay to send them. And of course, one expects Germany and other countries to join what is described as a kind of coalition. So those decisions by London and Warsaw or pledges are important because they're moving the process forward. And of course, that comes together with many other important, supplies that are critical, such as defense systems, such as Bradleys and other types of equipment that have been promised by US, France, and other countries, and that's also, if you add to it, ammunition and intelligence and so on, that is by far the most important support the Western coalition, the Western countries can provide to Ukraine, and Ukraine needs this support, even if it's doing well in terms of standing up to the Russian onslaught. Russia is not doing very well, but of course the disparities between the potential of Russia and Ukraine are still there, and they have to be minimized, and that's essentially the West's role.
Sorry to cut in, but we're running out of time. A very quick thought on why you think President Putin has changed his top commander in Ukraine and what that might change on the ground.
I think there are two main reasons. One is, they are thinking in the Kremlin about big offensive and about, making sort of more complex, if you like, starting more complex operation. But there's a question mark whether this is possible. So putting the chief of defense in charge makes kind of sense. But the second issue is it's about infighting within the Kremlin, and all those groups I mentioned, Wagner, there's other National Guards, and all those people are striving, to gain more influence. So the military are, for example, not happy with the private companies having their embassies. So they're fighting for, if you like, the year of the Tsar. But it's not clear at all whether this will actually change the dynamics, whether this will be effective, because Russia is not really a country well managed, and that concerns the armed forces as well.
Oh, Robert Pichel, fascinating to get your take on it. Thanks so much for your time this morning. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, the Post Office is issuing an urgent warning to households who use a prepayment meter to ensure that they access the tailored government support that's available to them. Well, I'm joined now by the head of payment for the Post Office, Andrew Goddard. Morning to you, Andrew Goddard. So you want to draw attention to the support that people on prepayment meters are entitled to. So remind us what that support is and how they get it.
Yes, good morning. Essentially, customers have been receiving vouchers since October. So the £400 that has been divided over 6 months, customers have been receiving vouchers in the post. Prepayment customers, if you're on direct debit, you'll have already had that money credited into your account. But if you're on a prepayment meter, you will have received vouchers. From October, we issue about 1.3 million every month, and 20% of those are still to be redeemed. So it's about £17 million worth of energy is still to be redeemed.
So there's a lot of people out there who haven't claimed it. How long have they got? How do they get access to it?
Well, they've been receiving those in the post or by email every month, like I said. And what the customers need to do is take those vouchers to their local post office with a form of ID and proof of address. And the staff in the post office will then redeem that against their energy key and card.
And there's a deadline, isn't there? I think is it January the 14th? That's the last.
Yeah, there is.
Date they can
we've
do
been
that?
urging. Yeah, we've been urging customers to go into post offices this week. As I said, they do expire now. There'll be some customers who may not have received it. The address details might not be correct, or they've just mislaid that voucher. And what we do is encourage those customers to immediately make contact with their energy company, who will then have a voucher reissued through us so that they can then go and redeem them in the post office.
Yeah, and as you say, £17 million still unclaimed from October's support. So a lot of people out there perhaps do need to check their vouchers and come forward. I wonder what your thoughts are on prepayment meters. I noticed yesterday that Citizens Advice said that an estimated 3.2 million people across Britain ran out of credit on their prepayment last year just because they couldn't afford to top it up. I mean, that's more people in 2022, they say, than the whole of the last 10 years combined. What do you make of that?
Yes, I mean, it's, prepayment meters have been around for a very, very long time. It's the way the energy companies work with certain customers who may not have the credit worthiness to be able to pay in arrears. And obviously, with the cost of living crisis, that's sort of accentuated. So it's these are the most vulnerable customers in society. So in many respects, what we've been trying to do is make sure that we can get this additional support from the government so that they can help with the cost of living crisis.
Well, yes, and Citizens Advice also said it had seen evidence of suppliers forcing people onto prepayment meters after they'd racked up debt. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that is very much a decision by the energy companies. It's not something the post office is directly involved in. You know, our goal is with the post office is to really help those customers across our 11,500 network to really, make sure that customers have a means of topping up, keep the lights on and obviously heat their homes. So it's not a great situation to be in, absolutely.
No, and today, of course, you're here to try to make sure that people get the support that they're entitled to. But I wondered if you had any thoughts on the recent Royal Mail strikes that we've been experiencing here. What kind of impact do they have on the post office?
Well, I mean, it's going to be, for customers who are trying to post internationally, I mean, it's going to have a major impact. It's something that we're monitoring. Royal Mail, we know, are working incredibly hard to restore services. The parcel force worldwide is still operating, so if customers are still wanting to use parcel force, they can come into our branch network, and that's operating as normal. We're obviously monitoring our systems, so we're on high alert as a result of the ransomware that you've been reporting in the news.
Well, yes, and just finally, last question, one last appeal for you to anybody on a prepayment meter. Just remind everybody what you're asking this morning.
Please do get in contact with your energy company. If you don't have that October voucher, please get in contact with your energy company today. If you do have a voucher, go down to the local post office and redeem that. Bring your ID and the money will be credited onto your account straight away.
OK, all really useful information. Andrew Goddard, Head of Payments at the Post Office, we really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Now, time for a quick bit of news before the end of the hour. And at least 6 people have died in Alabama and another in Georgia after a powerful storm swept through the southern United States, causing tornadoes. You can see some of the pictures of the debris there. Officials have reported significant damage to properties, with up to 50 homes destroyed. And at least a further 12 people have also been taken to hospital. Those pictures really give an idea of some of the damage being done.